Very good evening to our pious yogis. In the previous Dhamma talk, we discussed about Paticcasamuppada. And at the end of the discourse, the Buddha said he saw the ancient path. He saw the ancient route traveled by the perfect enlightened ones of the past. And by following that path, the Buddha has thoroughly known aging and death, its origin, its sensation, and the way leading to its cessation. So the Buddha came to know the origin of each link, its cessation, and the way leading to the cessations. So in other words, the Buddha see every link in terms of the four aspects of truth or four noble truths. So in one of the discourses, the Buddha says he is the knower of the path, the discoverer of the path, or the one skilled in the path. So in other words, he become a perfectly enlightened one by following this path, and then he declared this path to all beings. He is known as perfectly enlightened one, Sammasambuddha, because he is liberated by non-clinging to revulsion towards these five aggregates through their fading away and cessations. So the path is there, but no one knows the path until the perfectly enlightened one appears in the world again. Similarly, we can say that the truth are there, or the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause or the origin of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering are there. But worldlings cannot see it because the mind of worldlings is blinded by ignorance or delusion. So until there's Sammasambuddha appear in the world, or then Sammasambuddha will reveal this truth to the world. So the disciples of Sammasambuddha following the path as revealed or as taught by the Sammasambuddha. So by following the path, then the disciple, for example the bhikkhu, becomes liberated by wisdom. In other words, liberated by non-clinging through revulsion towards these five aggregates, through their fading away and cessation. That's why they are known as one liberated by wisdoms. So in that way, these disciples of Sammasambuddha, by following that path, in other words, the disciple becomes the possessors of the path. So have you possessed this path? We're going to, yes. Yeah. Only those who has attained the stream onwards, you become the possessors of this path. So the perfectly enlightened one has discovered the path without the teachers, realized the enlightenments without the teachers, but his disciples are those who follow his teaching and the path. So the disciple of Sammasambuddha follow the path and then liberated by wisdoms. In order to be liberated by wisdoms, one has to develop this knowledge of revulsion towards the five aggregates, which are the objects of clinging. This knowledge of revulsion is known as Nibbida Jnana, or in Pali. So only meditators could realize, for example, the instant arising of a mental physical phenomena constantly and continuously. Then they begin to gain this experience of nibbida, or revulsions. Before the appearance of Sammasambuddha, all the worldlings would think that there's an everlasting self, or there's everything soul residing inside the body and so on. When there's a notion or idea of self, then some of them might think that this self is everlasting or the soul is permanent, and will transmigrate from one existence to next existence and so on. But some hold that this self is only last temporarily for one life. There's no life after this. This is because they could not see conditionality or cause and effect. Even though they may understand about cause and effect, but they might think that it's a once same being or entity that will create the karma, and one and the same entity will experience the result of karma. Others would hold that the doer of the karma and the experiencer of the results are two different persons or two different beings. So if one aspires to understand the teaching of karma well and rebirth, one must able to realize or to understand clearly paticca or conditionality. So this teaching was summarized in brief when Upatissa met Venerable Asaji. So you might have heard this before. Ye Dhamma hetu pabhava tesam hetum tathagato aha te sanya yo nirodo evan vadi mahasamano. So in other words, there are these Dhamma which have arisen because of certain causes. Our master, the great Samana, has told about these causes. And there's this state, Nirodho or Nibbana, where all these Dhamma and their causes come to cessation. The great Samana has told of this cessation as well. So this is the teaching of the great Samana. So there are these Dhamma which have arisen because of certain causes. So what are these Dhamma? These Dhamma refer to Dukkha Satya, the noble truth of suffering. And Dukkha Satya is in fact five aggregates which are the objects of clinging. So they are arising due to certain causes. In other words, there is a cause. So it's known as Samudaya Satya. The great Samana also has explained that this state, Nirodha Satya or Nibbana, where all these Dhamma and their causes come to cessation. So if one aspires to attain cessation, then one must follow the path. So during the practice of mindfulness meditation, meditators are in fact developing the Noble Eightfold Path in order to realize the Four Noble Truths. If one doesn't develop the Noble Eightfold Path, then it's not possible to realize the true natures of five aggregates of clinging, or it's not possible to overcome DT, the wrong view of the self. So if one has not yet realized the true natures of five aggregates clinging, in other words, Namarupa, then one might hold to the notion or idea of an I, or person, a being. So whenever there's any form of suffering arising, those who hold to the view of self, you feel that I'm suffering, my body is in pain, and so on. Or those who hold that the self or the soul only lasts for one life, then they might think this is the only life, so they may not have any interest to do good. They may want to enjoy all kinds of sensual pleasures, might not have any fear to commit evils, and so on. So because of wrong view of self, then some might think there's no result of doing evil, there's no benefits of doing any merits. So as you know, there are various wrong views. For example, one of the wrong views known as Akriya DT, the moral inefficacy of action view. So those who hold such wrong view might think that killing, slaughtering, or making others to kill, this will be no evil and no outcome of evil. Or if one makes offering, encourage others to make offering, this is no merit, no outcome merit. And some hold to this Ahituka DT, believe that there's no cause for anything. So only one who has practiced the Noble Eightfold Path, the four foundation of mindfulness, correctly, rightly, then they would overcome this wrong view. In fact, when this view of self has not yet been uprooted, the view of self can be arising during the practice of meditation. For example, when the practice is not yet progressing well, or at the beginning of a practice, sometimes there's a feeling of dislike towards certain mental states, feeling of aversion towards pain, discomfort, noise, and so on. This is because due to the latent defilements, DT. So that's why DT is an immediate cause of the arising of other defilements and unwholesome thoughts, evil speech, evil deeds. So only by overcoming DT, the view of self, during mindfulness meditation, then meditators will make further progress. If, let's say, meditators always control the process of mindfulness, then it's difficult to realize the true natures of the mindfulness. So that's why we give the instructions saying that meditators have to train the mindfulness, develop the mindfulness. So when meditators are mindful of any phenomenon, at the time meditators must let the mind fully experience the process of that phenomenon. But at the beginning of meditation, and as long as mindfulness is not sharp and not yet attain deep concentration, then it's difficult to fully experience a process of phenomenon. So when meditators are mindful of any object, at the time the mind is experiencing the process of the object or the phenomenon as it duly occurs. They need not have to doing too much of conceptualizing the experience. For example, when meditators are mindful of the processes of rising movements and falling movements, though they make mental noting as rising, falling, but the nature of movements could be keep on changing. For example, short, long, heavy, light, or tight. So they should not keep on take note that as I'm experiencing a tight movements, or the movements getting shorter than before, or lighter, and so on. Or there's a pushing movements, there's a pulling movements, and so on. So in other words, when there's too much of conceptualizing the experience, in other words, meditators have to use many words as if describing one's own experience. Once describing one's own experience in the mind. So in that way, the mindfulness or bare awareness, bare attention is distracted very much by the words, by the concept of the experience. So sometimes meditators are mindful of a process movements. The movements could be keep on changing. So meditators merely, although not rising, but must pay full attention to that process of rising movements, fully experiencing the process movements till the end of the process. If the experience of that process movements is clear, that experience will stay in the mind naturally. So meditators could fully experience any process of movements or any process of phenomenon, then they could experience the characteristics of the phenomenon clearer and clearer. So that experience also help meditators to purify the mind. Or in other words, when meditators could experience the true nature of the phenomena clearer and clearer, then mental defilements are getting weaker or lesser. But at the beginning of practice, meditators could not pay full attention in this fully experience of the process of the phenomenon. Sometimes meditators might gain some new experience, then the mind will begin to think about it or becomes curious about it. It is the nature of the mind to become curious about something that's new, why there's these changes in the movements, the arising of this object, and so on. So meditators must be mindful of thinking about experience or the feeling of curiosity about the experience, and so on. So meditators have to be mindful of what object that's arising at that present moment. So when the mindfulness is getting more and more constant and continuous, and when there's deep concentration, meditators can see the process of the object clearer and clearer. At the same time, there's a process of mindfulness of the noting mind. When the mindfulness is weak, then meditators have to make mental labeling. Mentally say, for example, rising movements. When perceiving there's rising movements, when perceiving there's falling movements, mentally say falling. So in other words, meditators have to do it purposely, intentionally, say rising, falling, pain, and so on. In other words, meditators could feel that he or she has to make the mental noting. But when meditators make progress in mindfulness, then sometimes meditators could realize that the mind will note it by itself. So in other words, when there's object rising, the mind will note it as it really occurs. Sometimes meditators could realize that the arising of an object and perceiving the arising of object and that mental noting as if happening very close to each other, as if like almost the same time. So when the mind can note the object by itself, then meditators himself or herself need not have to make mental noting anymore because the mind can note the object by itself. So when meditators could sustain the effort and increasing the effort gradually, When the mindfulness getting stronger and stronger, and with very deep concentration, then meditators may realize every phenomenon is arising and passing away very instantly. So at the time, the objects arising and passing very rapidly, the mindfulness also arising and passing away very rapidly with the object. So at the time, it's not possible for the mind to know it. So at the time, the mind will drop that noting by itself. So at the time, the mindfulness is very swift, very rapid, because the object is arising and passing away very rapidly. If meditators try to make some labeling, then will disturb the mindfulness. So at the time, mindfulness is arising with the object and then passing with the object very rapidly. So meditators have to just let the mindfulness, the flow of mindfulness going on by itself. Although there is no mental noting, but if the experience is very clear, meditators will remember the experience. So during the practice, meditators should be able to realize that sometimes they have to make the labeling themselves. Sometimes the mind will know it by itself, and so on. As long as the concentration is not deep enough, meditators have to put some effort to make labeling. So when meditators have developed sharp mindfulness and deep concentration, they begin to realize that there's a pair of processes. So at the time, if the mindfulness is very strong, meditators also could realize the second process of mindfulness. The second process of mindfulness noted the first process of mindfulness that noted the object. So in other words, meditators come to realize that there's a series of the object which is arising due to conditionality, in other words, cause and effect. So whenever there's object arising, the mindfulness also will be arising immediately, instantly. If that object has disappeared, the mindfulness which is arising dependent on that object will also disappear instantly. If the object has not arisen, then the mindfulness can't arise. So meditators also could realize every object is arising and passing away instantly. For example, meditators could mindful of a process of movements in more and more details. At the beginning of practice, meditators might perceive, for example, the process of bowing down consists of 2-3 processes of movements. But when meditators could increase the mental effort gradually and able to train themselves to slow down gradually, they might be able to mindful more and more processes of movements in that bowing movements. So that's why it's important to develop specific mindfulness or mindfulness in more details for a period of time, or develop mindfulness in more details while doing certain activities. When meditators are not able to develop mindfulness in more details, then they should sustain the mindfulness by practicing general awareness or general mindfulness. So when meditators could realize every object is arising and passing away very instantly, the mindfulness also arising by itself. Whenever this object, then meditators come to realize actually there's no self behind these phenomena. And when meditators could realize the specific characteristics of the phenomena clearer and clearer, and there's a process of mindfulness, then they would overcome the view of self or personality, identity view at that moment. So whenever this object, then the mindfulness arising, when that object had disappeared, then there will be arising of another object. If one object had not disappeared, then the next object can't arise. Similarly, the mindfulness that noted the previous object had passed away, then it's because there's another object arising in the next moment, then there will be arising of another process of mindfulness. So only meditators could put forth effort for a period of time and able to develop attentive and precise mindfulness for a period of time, then they could see clearly. So those who have experienced this meditation might understand that only through the practice of mindfulness meditation, one could develop the path for the Noble Eightfold Path fully. In order to be able to realize every process of phenomenon from the beginning to the middle to the end, meditators have to increase the mental effort gradually. In the Noble Eightfold Path, or Viriya refers to Samma Vayama. So if the mindfulness is able to perceive well every process of phenomenon from the beginning to the end, the meditators will begin to develop concentration. Sometimes meditators could be perceiving instant arising and passing away of an object. Or sometimes meditators only perceive the passing away of the object. So meditators should be mindful of them as they really occur based on the personal experience at that moment. So at each moment of mindfulness, the other factor of the path, right thoughts, has the characteristics of directing the mind to the object. So that right thought is the mental factors of vitaka, applied thought or applied attention. And at each moment of mindfulness, the mind is also purified. Purified from unwholesome speech, unwholesome actions, wrong livelihood, or wrong speech, wrong actions, wrong livelihood. So when there's momentary concentration in those Vipassana Samadhi, so that Vipassana Samadhi gives rise to insight knowledge. So that insight knowledge leads to right understanding, samadhi. That means rightly understand, for example, the nature of impermanence through personal experience, direct experience. So in other words, meditators shall realize the true nature of five aggregates of clinging or nama-rupa as they really occur at the time. Meditators could not perceive any self or an I except processes of nama-rupa. So at the time meditators comprehend the true natures of mental and physical phenomena. But that knowledge is still considered mundane knowledge as long as meditators have not yet uprooted any mental defilements. But even though the knowledge is mundane, but according to the commentary, mundane knowledge overcome the obsessions. The commentary say that knowledge of suffering forestall the false view or wrong view of personality, individuality. So when meditators could realize constantly the instant arising and passing away of mental physical phenomena, then meditators come to realize the truth of suffering. In other words, meditators realize sankhara dukkha at that moment. Sankhara dukkha is defined as the nature of being constantly oppressed by the instant arising and passing away. Meditators can only realize Sankaruka during the practice of mindfulness meditation, Vipassana meditation. In other words, when they have attained Vipassana Samadhi, then they shall realize Sankhara Dukkha. So those who do not practice mindfulness meditation, Vipassana meditation, you never understand what is Sankhara Dukkha. That's why we say that 5 aggregates of clinging or Namarupa are suffering to mindfulness meditators, Vipassana meditators. So, in other words, there's no self or being and I behind that experience of suffering. So that's why the commentaries say the knowledge of suffering forestall the false view or wrong view of personality, individuality, or the view of self. Then the knowledge of origin forestall the view of annihilation. It's because meditators realize through their personal experience the object is always arising depending on condition. So here, especially meditators could realize clearly the mindfulness or the consciousness is always arising dependent on the object. As long as the condition is there, consciousness will be arising. So meditators come to realize as long as a condition is not yet removed or uprooted, then there shall be a birth or rebirth again. But the view of annihilation, Ucchedaditi, say that a self or being only lasts for one existence. There's no more life after this life. But one who practices mindfulness meditation, Vipassana meditation correctly, will come to realize that as long as a condition is there, then there will be phenomenon arising again. So in other words, meditators who see the arising of a phenomenon correctly, rightly, then they would overcome the view of annihilation. Then when meditators could see passing away or disappearance correctly, rightly, then they shall be able to overcome eternity view, sasadhatiti, at that moment. In other words, when meditators realize the condition that causes arising of the awareness or the consciousness, when that condition had passed away, the awareness or consciousness will also pass away. So if the object doesn't arise, then the mindfulness or the consciousness will not arise. Or in other words, when the condition has ceased, then the mindfulness or consciousness arising depending on the conditions also will cease. So in that way, that knowledge of cessation forestall the eternity view, sasadhatiti. Then, by putting one's own effort into the practice to develop the path, so that knowledge of the path forestall akriyaditi, the moral inefficacy of action view. So this comprehension of knowledge helps to overcome the view of self. So only by overcoming the view of self during the practice, then one would make further progress. So if the view of self is overcome during the practice, then one also could overcome other defilements, for example, clinging to the experience or craving for the experience. Sometimes meditators might cling to certain experience or craving, searching for some experiences. In that way, it's not possible to purify the mind because the practice is defiled by these defilements, clinging or craving. Or sometimes the practice is defiled by the idea or notion of an I or self. That's why in the commentary explain that in the ultimate sense, these four noble truths should be understood as void, empty. Void means sunya. In other words, there's no experiencer, there's no doer. The commentary summarized that for there's suffering, but none who suffer. Doing exists, although there's no doer. Extinction is, but no extinguished person. Although there's a path, there's no goer. That's why we say that meditation is merely an experience. Or in other words, mindfulness meditation is merely an experiential meditation. So meditators take every phenomenon as an experience. Meditators need not have to make a distinction that this is good experience or bad experience. Meditators need not have to get involved himself or herself into the experience. So only through this knowledge, understanding, the meditators, you make more and more progress in insight knowledge. So I wish all yogis put forth enough effort and being patient so that they could gain full experience into true natures of ultimate realities and eventually purifying the mind and attain the ultimate purity of mind.
สาธุ สาธุ สาธุ